George Custer, Almost an American Hero by Andy Shalett and Michael Carley. There are not enough Indians in the world to defeat the 7th Cavalry. George Armstrong Custer. This young leader, who grew up in the state of Michigan, led his cavalry into many battles during the Civil War. After the Civil War ended, Native Americans were his next target. He led his men through many successful battles and eventually to their deaths at the Battle of Little Bighorn. Many people either love him for his leadership in the Civil War or despise him for his terrible leadership that led many to their deaths.
George Armstrong Custer was born December 5, 1839 in New Rumley, Ohio, with his mom Mary and his father Emmanuel. He had 4 younger siblings, Thomas, Margaret, Nevin, and Boston.
He spent most of his boyhood in Monroe, Michigan, where he lived with his half-sister and her husband. He was very poor as a kid and was determined to live a better life. To pay his way through McNearly Norman School, he carried coal with a friend.
After he finished school, he taught for 2 years and was then shipped off to West Point. He was last in his class and was always slacking off. He was almost sent to jail, but the Union desperately needed officers. After 4 years of college, Custer was finally ready to become part of the United States military.
He was appointed to the 2nd Cavalry at the start of the war. His first battle in the Civil War was Bull Run on June 21, 1861. His generals were impressed by his bravery and skill, so after the first battle he was sent south to the 5th Cavalry. He joined Major General George McClellan's in the Peninsula Campaign. Early in the campaign, he showed he was willing to take risks. After his commanding officers debated whether or not to cross the Chickahominy River, Custer went straight to the center of the river to check the depth, not knowing if he would survive. He was able to check the depth successfully, and soon he convinced the commanding officers to let him lead the Michigan Cavalry after several more acts of risky decisions. He joined the Michigan Cavalry, and on his first battle, he captured 50 Confederates.
Custer's risky decisions had always paid off, and this became known as Custer's luck. He is known as being one of the luckiest leaders in Civil War history. Custer had a special mix of audacity and bravery that helped him to be a great Civil War leader.
Custer finally became the youngest brigade general at the age of 23. When the Civil War came to a close, Custer was present at the surrender of General Lee. Custer today is seen as one of the greatest Civil War leaders of all time. His legacy in this war will always be seen as a great thing. But this is where his legacy can be seen as a bad thing, in the murder of Native Americans. The great history of Custer soon would turn sour.
Shortly after the Civil War in July 1866, he was given the rank of Major General and second in command of the 7th Cavalry. He was assigned with the rest of the newly formed 7th Cavalry to Fort Riley, Kansas. He spent the winter of 1866 to 1867 preparing his new men for the battle in the Indian Wars.
On November 27, 1868, Custer was recalled to duty by General Philip H. Sheridan. In just that November, he had won the battles of the Washita River against the Cheyenne Native Americans.
Years later, on June 22, 1868, the 7th Cavalry was sent out to locate villages of the Sioux and Cheyenne Native Americans that were involved in the battles of Rosebud Creek. The group of almost 1,900 men was split into 3 groups of around 600 soldiers each. One led by Custer, and General Terry was from Fort Abraham in the Dakota Territory. One led by General Crook from the Fort Fetterman in Wyoming, and one led by General Gibbon from Fort Ellis. On June 25th, Custer's scouts reported that there was a massive army of 1,000 Native Americans that were lying between the Rosebud and Little Bighorn rivers.
Custer had a long break since his last victory and missed the glory. So that night, Custer decided to take his troops and would go in unassisted by other groups of soldiers to take the Sioux camp and to take on the Native American army. They would have 3 groups come in and try to surround them. So that morning, Custer split his men into 3 groups. First led by him would go to the west of the mountains, while the second group, led by Major Marcus Reno, would go around the mountains to the east, while Captain Frederick Bentee's forces would go through the mountains.
However Custer's plan looked good on paper, it was poorly executed. Reno's battalion was met by too many Native Americans, and since they were in small groups of only around 200 men, they couldn't battle back and had to retreat. When they retreated, they found General Benteen's battalion, and they both retreated because of how injured Reno's troops were. Custer, having only 266 men, were the only ones to actually reach the village, where over 2,000 warriors confronted Custer and killed all of his men and himself, since Custer did not retreat. This battle became known as Custer's Last Stand.
His leadership in many Civil War battles makes him well known today. With his mix of audacity and bravery, Custer was a great leader, but soon his ego got the best of him and later led to the death of his men. And he was not just very smart, and he fed his ego.
His legacy today lives on in many ways. He left a legacy as a brilliant and lucky leader through the Civil War that helped lead to a Confederate surrender. However, as good as that legacy was, he still has the terrible legacy of being too risky and feeding his ego to the point where he led all of his men to their deaths that could have easily been prevented. He also left a legacy about bold decisions. He made many risks during his career that paid off in his benefit, but when he made too risky of a decision, it backfired horribly and cost all of his men's lives and his own.